Uh, so emotional prep, then those 2 workshops of relationships. And what's neat about what I find, like I said, yeah, it'd be nice if we did 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a school working on it. But these actors that I work with all over the world, they take over, they'll do workshop 3, they'll do workshop 3 again, they'll do workshop 4. They even come back and do a workshop 1. They're like, hey, I want to revisit it, just as a muscle, to work that muscle and listening. So it's really neat. They just do different levels at different times, but you have to do it in kind of an order, but then you can come back to any spot, because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. We all, how Judy, you'll be like, oh, I get this repetition thing, but you might be terrible with activities, or how to use your imagination with activity. It's always, the work is always 2 steps forward, 5 steps back.
Yeah, also if you don't practice, you get stiff.
Yeah,
It's like with your muscles, yeah.
yeah.
Kind
I
of.
find, I think so, but what's neat, because I have these actors that, that then they'll be a month go between without working with me, and then or a month and a half or something, and then they'll work again, and they get all worried, being, I really have found that you don't go backwards. You might get a little stiff, but you can't go backwards as an actor in what you learn, what affects you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
once you start learning something, and you start learning about really listening to someone, and you can't go backwards. You'll know when you're not listening or not,
Yeah, you're
And
right. Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, you might feel a little rusty, but I find in that first day, once you work with me, boom, you're right back onto track, because you really, I find, don't go backwards in the work. You might be a little rusty just from doing it, but you really are always actually moving forward, even though you feel like you're going down. How you're here. You were here, and it's a struggle, but you're actually here,
Yeah, also
and
your instinct remembers the difference, yeah, and you don't get like
you're
fooled.
training your instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're training not to use you're training a different muscle, not to use the brain muscle, to use your instincts. I really believe, Judy, that all the work is about strengthening the connection to your impulses. I mean, there's crafting you have to learn, but it's all about strengthening the connection to your impulses. That's where great acting comes from. You have to learn craft. You have to learn how to craft things and be specific, but none of that matters if you don't have a connection to your impulses, we can say.
Yeah.
Then I do, after those 2 workshops of relationships, then I start getting into character work. So workshop 6 is the first part of character work in impediments, physical impediments. And we do physical impediments and pain. And workshop 7 is when you start doing drugs and alcohol. And
I love that part.
yeah, I love that part.
So much fun.
It's a lot of fun, and and not easy, but you start learning. And just think, like we said about the process, the problem that happens in universities and with a lot of schools is that don't have this process like that. Most acting classes in the world is everyone working on a scene, you're working on a scene. And you might learn a little something about, you're doing a little streetcar, you're doing a little this, you're doing a little Tennessee Williams, you're doing some, and you might learn a little something, but you don't have any of that foundation that we just talked about. So you're just grasping at things, and you don't know how. You don't have a foundation, a path of how to do it again. Like you do another scene and you're like, oh boy, and that's the difference. One reason I mention that is because all these steps that I just talked about, all that into workshop 7 there, you're not working with text yet. different than every other acting class in the world.
Yeah.
And oh, I have to mention the one thing I do different. And I don't know, I find it interesting, Judy, as a teacher, how this happened. And it happened because of teaching these 5-day workshops all over, is I give text the very first class. The very first class,
I
I give,
remember. Yeah, I
I
asked
give a
you about
little,
it. Yeah.
I give a little text that they, on the 5th day, they use. The reason why I started doing that is because I wanted the actors, they're doing that first 5 days. They're trying to remember, they're trying to intellectually figure out, what is this Meisner, what is this technique about? What's it about? Why are we doing this repetition? They start to get it, but it's a real struggle. We don't work with text till my 8th workshop. So I give them a little text the very first workshop so they can see how far their impulses can take them in their acting to what it can be. So they do this text on the end of that first workshop, where after 4 days of repeating and really knowing what repeating's about with a teacher that knows what it's about, then all of a sudden to do text. And it's great, Judy, it's great, especially with actors that are professional actors and stuff that have worked a lot. They can't do like they've done before. They cannot do how they're used to, acting the text, giving the text meaning instead of the meaning coming from us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing. Gosha,
it's
what do you
amazing.
think? It's
Yes,
So I
very
give
powerful,
text.
right?
it's
Yeah,
powerful and interesting.
yeah.
Do you add your own exercise in these workshops?
Oh, there's a lot. It's a good question, because there's a lot of I know a couple teachers I know, what they've been doing is, they know Meisner, but they'll do, it's like you know, I know a couple of them right now, they call it, they made up a name of their technique, they call it the Ditmyer method, you know what I mean? Because they learned from different people, just like I did, Uta Hagen and method, and stuff, Strasberg and they do their own combination kind of how they work. I find it very interesting with me, even though I've worked with different techniques and different teachers and I've learned many different things. I find that it's most important to work it straight through the process of that the Meisner work, if you go really through it all, it gives you everything. There's, yes, there's different things you can learn from different, but I find that, like what I learned with Uta Hagen, maybe this will help you put it in, make sense. What I learned from Uta is like icing on the cake. It's stuff that I can, but the cake was Meisner. I mean, the stuff I learned from Uta and from Zoe Caldwell and different things are like icing and decorations on the cake and different things that I can use and things that, but the cake is Meisner. Otherwise, I would just have icing. I wouldn't have the whole cake. That's how I
Beautiful
feel about it.
metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, when do you work with the text in your lesson?
Yeah, that's, in the very first workshop, right, they do a short, it's like a short
Yes.
scene that Meisner, it's these scenes that Meisner
But
used.
do you have any program of work with monologues or scenes?
So then the 8th workshop I do, and sometimes I do it sometimes I do the scene work before character work. We do like the first scene work can be, before we do the character work, after we do repetition, coming to the door, emotional prep, relationships, domestic exercise. Then we can start working on a scene, the basis of a scene. I'm working on text. Um, Sometimes I do it, just how it works out. We do it after doing character work, because you can start working on a scene without character work, just learning how to work from the text. that first work that you're really working on text, really working on it, there's things to learn about that, super objectives and actions, and objectives, super objective to objective of the scene to actions, intentions. And I teach that. Meisner taught that. People don't realize, people think Meisner's all about repetition. And they don't know that's nothing. That's the baby step. That's just the very first baby step into this technique. And that's another reason why I started teaching around the world, because that's just that's just a vehicle to start you off. Then we have to really, once you start learning all these things and getting stronger and stronger, then you can start working on text. Again, like Meisner, he was very smart, different than most acting classes. He said, don't work, you can't work on text without knowing how to live 100% truthfully. But we do that. Most classes are acting. So you're just learning to act, but you're not being 100, really, let's be honest, you're not being 100% truthful. You are not what great actors do. That's why there's such a difference of what many actors do and what great actors do. It's a big difference, because and it's mysterious to everyone, because it looks like they're doing nothing, but they're 100% truthful. So it's mysterious. It's actually technique. So then I start working on text on either right after all those workshops, or after doing character work, or because you can do the text work and then you can start doing character work and do text again. So there's text work without character work. I believe, Judy, that you can do all this text work, learning how to craft from the text, how to find super objectives, actions. And you can then also add on top of that character work. But there's a lot to learn before even character work.
Yeah.